Have you ever played that game of Tug-of-War? Maybe at a family reunion or in the park with some people. The whole thing with that Tug-of-War game is it might be fun to play at a family picnic, but not so much at an IEP meeting. So if you're tired of the arguing and the pulling back and forth at IEP meetings, stay tuned because we're going to be talking about how to solve that tug of war problem, and in particular, how to solve the people problem that sometimes comes up at IEP meetings. I'm Charmaine Thaner. I am here and excited that you're joining us. We are here every Thursday at noon, and our purpose is to help each of us become better advocates for our children. So think about tug of war. You know, the object is to pull one team into that mud puddle in the middle or across that line. And then that other team that made all that effort and pulled them over, they're the winners, right? Well, sometimes in a tug of war, you have the two sides pulling each other, and one is like, I'm tired of this. I'm just stop. I just give up. This is not for me. Or sometimes in that tug of war game, you might actually have people pulling so hard on each side that the rope breaks. Well, how does this apply to IEP meetings? Well, let's look at that because that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, how to solve those people problems. So, if you look at tug of war and you look at, what would that look like during an IEP meeting? It might be that the one side with more perceived power, which for a lot of parents is the school district, is the one with more perceived power, is going to win because they're going to pull and pull and pull. And they're going to use that authority and they're going to be the winners. So then you have a win-lose situation. Or sometimes it's like parents, we just feel like you just get so beaten up that you decide, this is not what I want to be doing. Whatever you say, fine, let's just be done. And then that's a case where your child's not going to win in that situation. Or during an IEP meeting, instead of the rope breaking, it might be the whole discussion and communication breaks down and you reach impasse. And then you've got to look at something else. So I'm super excited that we have lots of people on with us live. So make sure you say hi and let us know where you're watching from. So if we look a little bit more at what it means at IEP meetings, you can usually have three scenarios when you're playing that tug of war. You might have the administration saying, we won, and they lost. You might have a parent saying, I just give up. Or you might have the situation where the rope broke. And in the IEP meeting, this is what it looks like. The parent is overruled, the parent decides to give up, or you reach that impasse where you have to start using alternative dispute resolutions. So an alternative to that tug of war game is something called principled negotiations. And this was introduced years ago in a very famous book called Getting to Yes, Negotiating Agreements Without Giving In. So we're going to be using principled negotiations as we talk through our live show today. And if you have questions, type them in and I'll make sure I respond. If you are watching live or on the replay, hit share and make sure you share this with your friends. So In principled negotiations, there's 4 basic components. There's the people component, interests, options, and the criteria that you're going to use to judge decisions. So we're just going to focus on the people part today. And then in upcoming shows, we'll have discussions about the other components. Now, you've probably heard be easy on the person and hard on the problem. Or you might have heard you need to separate the people from the problem. But, like, what does this mean, right? It's like, I don't know. How do I separate that person? Because I see that person representing the problem sometimes, right? But in order to be effective at meetings, we really do need to compartmentalize, and we need to see that person as a person on the side, and we need to see the problem as what we need to be focused on. So many times in IEP meetings, we start getting into these arguments with the people, and it becomes more of an ego-centered argument versus what the real issue is or what the real problem is that you want to solve. So we want to step away from that, and we want to make sure that what we're addressing is really the problem that we want to solve. And just to remind yourself that that argument isn't about the person, but it's about what your child needs. So even though you may really dislike somebody in the IEP meeting, we need to put that aside, and we're going to concentrate on resolving the problem. So this might sound easier said than done, right? How do we go about separating the person and instead focusing on the problem? So before we go into this, let me do a quick check back here and see if we have any questions that are coming up. Yeah, so we have California represented. And feel free to type in your questions or your comments so we can make sure we have some time to answer those. So let's see here. Oops, I got to turn my phone on mute. And I think I'll just go this way. So the first thing that you can do when you're trying to remind yourself that we're here talking about the problem is to treat each relationship as a long-term relationship. Because chances are, in the school setting, you're going to have to work with this person again. If they're the special ed teacher, if they're the principal, if they're the special ed director. So you always want to be cognizant of, this is a long-term commitment, and there's probably no room for a divorce in this commitment. So if you keep that in mind, that helps you as you proceed through the meeting. Now, another thing that you can do to separate the person from the problem is to model respectful behavior, no matter how you're treated. And this can be, like one of those big challenges, because human nature is that if you feel like you're being attacked, then you want to attack back. And if instead you sit back when you're being attacked and you don't retaliate, the person sees that this is not a button that they can push, that they aren't provoking you with their behavior. And a lot of times that attacking behavior will stop. Another thing that you can do is to try to visualize yourself and this other person that you're having the conflict with as your ally. because this increases the chance of collaboration. Now, I know as a parent, I know as an advocate, all of this may sound like great, Charmaine, but how does this really happen? And it is a process that I think we always have to be working on, because it's not something that comes naturally to us. I think when we're attacked, we want to attack back. We feel defensive. When we're angry at somebody that we see as the decision maker, or we're angry at somebody that we see as having all the power, it is really hard to switch that and say, I'm going to see this person as an ally. I'm going to see this person as having my child's best interests at heart. I'm going to take a different path today in our meeting. And if they say some negative, derogatory comments and try to push my buttons, instead, I'm going to pause. I'm going to sit back. And I'm going to wait for them to finish their venting, or they're arguing, or they're yelling at me. And instead, I'm going to say, now let's turn our attention to what we're really here for today. Let's look at how, as a team, we can develop a plan that we're going to all be in consensus with, that we're all going to support, that is going to be based on what my child needs. So let me know if this makes sense. Give me a like or a thumbs up if this is making sense. If this is like, I have no idea how I would even go about that, type that in the comments so we can have a discussion, and it's not just me doing all the talking, because I think it's a much better conversation when we have interaction. Okay, so I encourage you to speak up and let us know what you think. Now, another thing that you can do when you're trying to separate the person and from the problem is make sure that you don't give up on your interests just to maintain a relationship with the other person. So this may sound a little contrary to what I've been talking about, because I've been talking about how are we going to see that person as an ally. But as a parent, you need to know what your bottom line is. And you need to make sure that you're not selling out your child in order to have a good relationship with the principal, or in order to have a good relationship with the teacher. So as much as possible throughout the IEP meeting, we want to look at the common ground that we have with each other. We want to recognize the feelings that other people are having in that room at that time. We want to try to put ourselves in their shoes and try to understand where they're coming from, because that will help you. But the bottom line is, if your child needs a certain service, if your child needs some support in the general ed classroom in order to be successful, you're not going to sell out in order to say, well, we walked away and we're friends. Because the bottom line is, it is about your child, right? So Lisa says, what if they really are not an ally and are only interested in saving money? And that's a good question, because we have to, if they're not reciprocating on this, if that's not their goal, is to maintain this relationship with you, but their goal is to save money and that's what they're focused on, then we need to be prepared for that ahead of time, because I think what we can do is, if we have been in meetings with these people before, we probably know where they're coming from, right? We probably know that the principal or the director of special education has a budget, has parameters, has, pressure from the superintendent. You guys are spending too much in that special ed budget. You need to cut back. So when we know that money is a concern and a pressure that they feel, and we also realize that, legally they're not supposed to bring up money as an issue. But then what we can do is we can prepare for that ahead of time and say, we're going to go in there asking for our child to be included. And we're going to look at how we provide supports in the general ed classroom. And I just guess that the principal or the director of special ed is going to be saying no and giving lots of other reasons. But we know that their bottom line is cost. So then what we can do is we can say, I know the reality is that we have to look at, how we're going to use the people in our building the best way. So instead of adding new people, how can we redefine roles that people currently have in the building? We can bring articles that show that inclusion doesn't cost more than segregation. So one of the biggest things, I think, with trying to deal with the people problems at meetings is to do some preparation ahead of time and think about where are they going to be coming from. And if I know that this is where they're coming from, how can I be ready to offer some information that will kind of ease that concern that they have? So we have another question here, and she says that I see the issue of parents seeing the IEP team as the enemy in our group meetings a lot. It's hard to simply get through group meetings when there's so much anger. I feel it will take much work to move past those feelings. And you're right. Because especially when parents have had past experiences and meetings that have been really negative and that you just have that anger in the air, it can be hard to move past that. And so there are a few things that I've tried that have been helpful when I was a parent or as an advocate. And so what I've tried to do in the past when I know it's going to be a really tense situation is to suggest to the parent that they sit down and talk with individuals one-on-one before the meeting and have some time to flush this out, because it's not like you can just bury those angry feelings and say, oh, Charmaine says I have to see them as an ally. So I'm going to push down my anger and I'm going to be this bright Pollyanna and I'm going to, yes, they're my ally and we're going to magically create this wonderful meeting. And that's not going to work either. So if there are past negative experiences, if people are still holding on to those negative feelings, one way to do, to counteract that is to have some time before the IEP meeting, like days before the IEP meeting, and have a one-on-one conversation and try to see where you guys agree. Where can you find some common ground? And sometimes it's just like this little thing that comes out in the conversation and you find out that you're both from Michigan and you love, boating on the lakes or something. And that little tinge of something that you have in common, that's what you need to nurture and build on. The other thing that you can do when there really are these intense emotions is to ask for a facilitator to be at your IEP meeting. Most states have facilitated IEP meetings where the State Department has trained people to be neutral facilitators, and having a good facilitator at your IEP meeting can really quell and keep you focused on how you need to get resolution to, the issues that you're talking about. So I would suggest that either the pre-meetings or having a facilitator at your meeting. So the follow-up question is, when leading a group, what words would you use to raise mad and sad parents out of this hole of anger? Well, it depends. So if you are in an IEP meeting and you're there as a friend to a parent, or you're there as an advocate, it just kind of depends on the situation. One of the things that I've done as an advocate is I'll just say, we've been sitting here for, 45 minutes. I think it would just be great if we could take a quick 10-minute break. People can go to the restroom, get a drink of water. And that break is a break in the actual intensity that the parent might be feeling. Go outside of the school building for a few minutes, get outside, away from that situation, and talk things through with the parent. Because it's really going to be hard to accomplish things if this meeting becomes this shouting match. And I've been in those kind of meetings. I've participated in those shouting matches, and it really doesn't do any good. You don't get any further. So, or taking a 10-minute break might not be the way to solve it. And you might just have to say, we've been sitting here for 45 minutes. It doesn't seem like we're making a lot of progress today. Let's look at rescheduling the meeting. Because you aren't going to get anywhere when there's those raw emotions, at least, what I've seen. So let me know if that helps some. So Judith says, my experience has been that they have a way of doing things, and if your child needs something different from their needs, their needs won't be met. I can do check-in with my child, but it's on his IEP. It's not effective with the way they do it, but I seem to get through to him. I don't want to be in a position as it affects my relationship with him negatively. So, yeah, that's the other thing to look at, is that a lot of times when we're in IEP meetings, we're asking the school team to do something differently. And as human nature, we are creatures of habit, right? And so it's really easy for us to fall back and do things that we're comfortable with. And when somebody asks us to do something differently, it's like, so whatever the supports are that they need, we need to make sure that the school provides those. So sometimes the words that I'll use are, what would it take to whatever you're talking about? So what would it take to change the schedule so we have check-in time with my child before, right before class starts or at the end of the school day? What would it take? What would it be like? If we could do this, how do you think, what kinds of things would need to be in place? So you want to bring it back to the table. You want to bring it back to the group. Because you might not necessarily have all the answers, even though sometimes we feel like, just ask me, I'll tell you how. The more that the group talks about it, the more that the group has ownership with the solution, the greater chance you have of it actually being implemented when people have ownership of the idea. So as much as possible, if you can ask open-ended questions and get people to respond and start thinking like, oh, and then it's like, oh, that's great. Well, what about if we, and so people start adding to that idea. And then you look at, okay, so we talked about a few different ways we can do this, and then summarize the options that you've come up with. And then say, so these are some of the things that we came up with. These were some of our ideas. Let's go back and look, because we want to make sure whatever idea we pick is going to fit that need. If we said my child needs a check-in at the beginning of the school day or at the end of the day, the reason why is to set him up for a day that he knows what's going to be scheduled, what's going to be laid out. Or if it's a check-in at the end of the day, that he's got his homework, that he's got all his stuff in his backpack. Whatever the reason is for the check-in, check-out, we want to make sure that our option will solve that and will meet that need. In one of our future broadcasts, we're going to talk about the criteria for making a decision, because that's really important. You don't want to come up with an idea that doesn't really resolve the need that you started with. So, Judith, thanks for asking that. Let me know if there's any more I can elaborate on, and to make sure that makes sense. So with people, I think we want to, as much as possible, identify them as a person we're going to have a long-term relationship with. We know it's not going to be helpful to attack them personally. Instead, what we want to be doing is making sure that we're focusing on the issue at hand. If you feel like you're not getting anywhere and it's just this, banging of heads against the wall, then you need to do something different, right? Because we know that definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So if you know in the past things have been pretty rocky when you're in a meeting with some of the school staff, try to talk with them ahead of time individually. Try to see if you can share what is making you upset. Use those I statements. But I don't know. I guess I'm the type of person that I wanted to just lay my cards on the table. I'm just going to be honest. I'm not going to be attacking or aggressive, but I just need to say, this is how I've been feeling at all the meetings we've had so far. And I don't want this next meeting to be that way again. What can we do differently? And put it back on the other person and see what ideas they have. Because without those lines of communication, without some, sliver of trust, it's really, really difficult to come up with any kind of decision that people are going to be committed to, and that's really going to be helpful for your child. So let me know if you have any other questions. And I want to, okay, here's Holly. Yay for Holly. She says, as a parent, if you feel a plan will not work, how can I effectively relay that to the team? So that's a great question, Holly. Thanks for asking that. So as a parent, you are the best expert, right, on your child, and you know what's going to work and what hasn't worked in the past. And if the IEP team is presenting some plan that is like, I just know in my heart this is not going to work, you need to talk about that at the meeting. So again, you need to look at what your child needs. So you can say something like, okay, let's go back and look at some of the things that we talked about at the beginning of the meeting. When we talked about my child's strengths, we said X, Y, and Z. We talked about how to use his strengths to teach him new things or new skills. I'm not sure this plan is based on his strengths. What do you think? and bring it back to that other person and let them try to rationalize, let them try to answer, does this plan really match my child's strengths? Or is it going to be this negative kind of consequence in the plan that's really going to be detrimental to my child wanting to be at school? The other thing that you can do is when you feel in your gut what they're suggesting isn't going to work, is to ask, again, more open-ended, clarifying kinds of questions. So you can say, I'm not sure exactly what that would look like. Could you explain that more? Can you give me a picture of what this plan would look like? Because sometimes our perception of what the plan is different than their perception. So sometimes it's like we are on the same page, but maybe we're using different words, or maybe how we have it written in the IEP is like too nebulous and up to too many interpretations. So sometimes just starting from, instead of, arguing about the plan, start from really getting clear on what their plan is and have them describe it, have them give you different scenarios of, if this happens, this is what we would do, or, so something like that, I think, can be really helpful. So, Holly, let me know maybe what you've done in the past when they suggest a plan that won't work, and, how have you been able to talk about that, and has that worked or not worked for you? So many times, I think, we can, I know for myself, it can be really easy for me to jump to a conclusion, have a knee-jerk reaction, and it's like I've got to remind myself to ask questions. And sometimes I just draw a question mark, kind of on my paper, and that reminds me, don't get into this argument, ask questions. And if you don't have my Art of Advocacy book, this is a resource that I have to see how it doesn't reflect, suggest that you get. You can get the Kindle version just for 99 cents, or you can buy the paperback version from Amazon. And I've got chapters in here with clarifying questions, and I have scenarios. So, it's kind of like you can read and almost role play of what you could say as kind of a comeback, or what kind of a additional question you could answer. So this book would be really helpful. The other book that I wanted to share with you is this book from Nicholas Martin, and it's called A Guide to Collaboration for IEP Teams. And it's like hard for me to figure out how not to get a glare on here. But I'll put this in the post description, and a lot of times I think just see if these books are available in the library. You don't have to necessarily buy it. But this book is mainly written for people who are going to be facilitators at IEP meetings, but it has a lot of great advice for parents in here when you are trying to, reach consensus at an IEP meeting. So, A Guide to Collaboration for IEP Teams. The other book that's not, centered around IEPs and special ed, but is, to me, like this fascinating read, is Gerry Spence's book, How to Argue and Win Every Time. And just the title itself, it's like, yes, I must get this book. I must read it. But he is like this wonderful storyteller. So the book is always really interesting. And he has these different things that he talks about from his experience as a trial lawyer, and just his tips for preparing for a trial you can use as tips preparing for an IEP meeting. His tips for, how you want to deal with difficult people are tips that you can use in an IEP meeting. So again, this is a resource that you can check out from the library, How to Argue and Win Every Time. I know some different organizations have resource libraries, and they're looking for different kinds of books that they can put in their library to help parents. So these would be some books that I would recommend. I will go through and make sure we don't have any other questions or comments. I appreciate you being here with us today. In the past, we've done pretty much hour-long live shows. I'm going to try to do just half-hour live shows when I don't have a guest, because I think that fits in better with parents, time frame, because we're all busy people. Holly does have another question. She says, when I have questions to the IEP, I find that they ask what I want, then just do it. It worries me that it's not based off my child's strength, rather just to have me go away. Yeah, and that's a great point, Holly, because you don't want people just appeasing you and say, let's give the parent what she wants, because the reality is they have no ownership, they have no commitment to actually implement what they just gave you. So you can have a well-written IEP, you can have an IEP that's based on your child's strengths and has a wonderful plan in there, but if it doesn't get implemented, what good is it, right? So it can be tricky. You don't want them just to appease you, because that's really not going to solve the issues. And Holly says he has amazing teachers who I believe truly want the best for my child. And there you go. So that's like a beautiful opening statement when you start an IEP meeting. Typically the facilitator will start, this is our agenda. We're going to go through this first, and they kind of get into everybody's reports. And as a parent, I always suggest that you say, excuse me, I have a couple things that, I would love to have us look at before we get into the details of our IEP meeting. And one of the things that I want to say at the very beginning is that I know my son has amazing teachers, and I know that they want the best for him. So I am so thankful and grateful that we are starting from a place where people do believe in my child. The other tip that I often share for the beginning of IEP meetings is for parents to say, before we start getting into everybody's reports, let's take a few minutes and have everyone go around the table and talk about my child's strengths, and, just name one or two strengths that you've seen from working with my son. And that changes that tone, and it puts people more at ease, and it starts from this grounded place of strengths versus, I know I'm in for an argument today. So what we can do at the beginning of the meeting can really have an impact on how the rest of the meeting goes. So I think acknowledging and thanking people for the good things that are happening for your child are important. I also think it's important that we all stay centered on what my child does well, what he's interested in. So let's start our meeting that way. And then throughout the meeting, let's keep going back and saying, if he's interested in this, we should make sure that we do this. And so I think that can be really helpful too. So if you have liked what you're seeing and hearing today, give us a thumbs up. If this is something that you think would resonate with other friends that you have, just hit that share button and you can share our Facebook Live video. So this is our last session, our last live show for June. July is coming up, and I already have two surprise guests scheduled for the last week in July. And I'll keep that a secret a little bit longer, but July may be a little switched up just because I'm also going to be heading up to Glacier National Park in Montana, where I'll have like zero internet. But stay tuned. I will be back next week, which is July 5th, and we will do another live Facebook show then, and we will keep talking about how we try to use principled negotiation versus this, aggressive arguing all the time at IEP meetings. So I hope you'll be back next Thursday. Yes, and we say, yes, let's frame the meeting at the beginning. Acknowledge and thanks. We'll begin doing this. Cool. Love it. So thanks for being here live. If you're watching the replay, make sure you can type in comments and questions, because I keep coming back to this Facebook page and reading your comments and responding to them. So go out and have a wonderful day. Have your mind be bubbling with some thoughts about how you can change things up for your next IEP meeting. And we shall see you live next Thursday at noon Mountain Time. Bye-bye.